Welcome back to Future Vision, the 2020 DTG Summit, streaming live around the world from our studio hub here in London. Well, our feature session now considers not just TV's past, present and future, but also the impact that it and the World Wide Web have had on our culture, our politics and our society. Well, we're doing all that with someone who is on a mission to reinvent how history is told through video, podcasts, online articles and more. He's one of the UK's best-known television presenters and the creative force behind History Hit TV, the Netflix for history buffs. He is, of course, the broadcaster, author and now entrepreneur, Dan Snow. Dan, welcome to Future Vision. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much for having me. Let's talk about a few big historical anniversaries first. This year is remarkable for its anniversary, although I'm always going about anniversaries. People call me Daniversary Snow, and certainly it always works as a great sting to entice people into a bit of history. But 120 years ago, the word television was first coined. It was coined by a Russian scientist called Konstantin Perisky, and he had a paper called Television by Means of Electricity, and it was for the first International Congress of Electricity at the World's Fair in Paris. So one of the newspaper and famous newspaper editor who's called C.P. Scott later poured scorn on the word's etymology. He said, television, the word is half Greek, half Latin. No good can come of it. Another big anniversary this year, 95 years ago, the first test of a working television was performed by the legendary Scottish engineer John Logie Baird. It was in October 1925, so actually it was this month. He was transmitting in his Hastings lab. We got other anniversaries too. We have got 90 years ago, the first TV ad on Charles Jenkins's TV station W3XK in Washington and Maryland. It was the first TV station in the US, and the ad was for Old Dutch Cleanser. There you go. The BBC also began Sound and Vision's broadcast that same year. Well, the first official Sound and Vision broadcast, though, was 1930 to test the entertainment value of the new medium. It was the drama production The Man with the Flower in His Mouth, and that was broadcast on July 14th, 1930. So that is 90 years ago, and that was at 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon. Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald watched it on a Logie Baird televisor with his family at number 10 Downing Street. 60 years ago, the first live televised royal wedding took place. Let's not forget, folks, the royal weddings were basically made up for TV events. In the 19th century, they didn't have big royal weddings. They're a very recent incarnation. Princess Margaret married Anthony Armstrong-Jones at Westminster Abbey. 20 million viewers turned in the UK, 300 million people around the world watched the event, and that was the same year. The legendary first US presidential election debate was televised. Little John F. Kennedy, a young senator from Massachusetts, faced then Vice President Richard Nixon, September 26, 1960, at a CBS studio in Chicago. 70 million people watched that 60-minute duel, and I think we can all agree that changed the way election campaigns were fought. And it was described as a gentlemanly and respectful contest, a little bit different to last week's clash between Biden and Trump. So I've been lucky enough to work in TV 20 years, but I'm not making any claims to be a digital native, but I do feel that I arrived just as I was coming from a generation which was open to the idea of digital. We were communicating digitally, we were sharing content, we were submitting essays at university digitally. This is way back in the early 2000s. So when I arrived on a television set for the first time, I found it obviously a huge excitement, a huge privilege, but also I was aware, even then, 2001, I was aware something odd was going on. Well, actually it was 2002 to 3. I thought, this is mad. We are putting all of this extraordinary effort in. We are shooting 10 times the material we're going to actually use in the hour broadcast. And then that hour is going to be put on telly opposite an England football match, and no one's going to watch it. And then it is impossible for that hour to be, it might be repeated, they might decide to release it as a DVD, but it's going to be very difficult for people to access that. And also I remember thinking, I was making programmes about battlefields. I don't want people to access these programmes sitting in their front room on their settee watching the telly. I think you should be able to access it while you're walking around, while you're on the battlefield itself, whilst you're out and about. And so really early on, I had this kind of passionate sense that something in this industry was going to change. And ever since then, I've been throwing a lot of muck at a lot of walls, trying to make that realization that lots of us had actually sit with commercial reality. So to try and make it possible to shoot things in a way that, and then broadcast them in a way that was very contemporary, but of course, who was going to pay for that? And I've worked with heritage institutions, I've worked with the BBC, I've worked with Sky, Channel 5 here in the UK, Nat Geo, Discovery in the US, Smithsonian, all sorts of people. And I'm absolutely convinced, I've always been convinced that there's a huge audience out there for niche subjects. Huge audience there for, in my case, history, but the same is true of many other subjects. At the moment, my son is obsessed with fishing. He's 5 years old. He just wants to watch Catching Monsters all day. And the brilliance of that programme, I don't know if anyone watched it, is they never catch a monster. But anyway, enough spoilers. So I experimented with apps on iPads, factual apps. I've experimented with WAP's old mobile phone, WAP internet. And I was always thinking there's got to be a way here where we can bypass the gatekeepers, we can take content out to everyone around the world. One kind of Damascus experience, road to Damascus-esque experience I had once, I was in, which I was talking with the team here yesterday about, I was in Gallipoli for the 100th anniversary of the Gallipoli landings in 2015. 100 years since those tragic First World War landings, the British, the French, Australians, New Zealanders, of course, very, very infamous campaign in Australian New Zealand history. And just as I was out there, Twitter released the Periscope app. Twitter became the first big player, if you like, to do live streaming from mobile over mobile network. And it happened that there was great mobile coverage there, so 4G, early 4G, all over that part of Turkey. And I was able to start broadcasting something that a week before would have required a sat truck, a crew of 3 people, unimaginable amounts of money. I was suddenly able to broadcast to a global audience. I had hundreds of people watching those first streams, sometimes thousands, just all around the world, leaving comments. Asking me questions, asking me to ask the historian I was beside questions, able to take them around the battlefield and show them. And I was just aware that this was just an extraordinary transition from a week before. And it's one of the few times I've ever felt myself at absolutely the coalface when a big tectonic shift has taken place. And obviously we've all witnessed that over the last 20 years. We've kept, those changes have kept coming, whether it's miniaturization, whether it's streaming in HD and now in 4K. And so I've always been looking for opportunities, but what has never changed, I don't think, is the core belief, which is that this extraordinary invention, which we've just heard is 95 years old this year, this extraordinary invention is able to transport people, to paint pictures and bring them audio from anywhere in the world, and now from space as well. In a way that is incredibly engaging and exciting for that audience. And I've never lost my great love and passion for that central idea behind television and storytelling and my belief in it as a platform.
Dan, thank you so much for all of that. Really fascinating to hear it. I think I'd like to start actually by showing a clip, if I can do that, of History Hit TV, just to give anybody out there who isn't a subscriber a chance to see exactly what Dan's talking about. Wow, some amazing images there, Dan. And I mean, I think many of us may remember, you started off as a podcast, and many of us will have listened to the podcast. The images, though, are incredibly important in telling history. And I just wondered, how did you go from a podcast to creating History Hits TV?
Well, that's right, because I was always a TV guy. I always loved pictures, and I always found the visual storytelling so exciting. There's nothing better than when you go to history and you go to a battlefield, you're saying how wonderful a cathedral is, or medieval manuscripts. It's pretty difficult doing that really with audio, actually.
Yeah.
And I think and whilst we're all excited by the podcast revolution at the moment, it's some stories need to be told visually. And I got late. I thought it was late into podcasting. It's one of those funny, that lovely Chinese expression, which is, someone came to me and they said, you should do a podcast. And I thought, well, I've missed the boat. Serials happened, it's all kicking off, it's saturated. And it's that lovely Chinese expression, which is, of course, the best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, but the second best time is right now. And so thank goodness I did. It changed my life. It gave me agency. It gave me freedom. It freed me from, frankly, kind of commissioning editors and being told what to do and where to go all the time. And having that self-commissioning, the euphoria of being able to create content with only yourself to answer for it. And the failures are your fault, but the success are your fault too. And you take risks and then you work out what's working. But so I was always looking for opportunities to get back in TV. When Netflix kind of went orbital about 5-6 years ago, there's a whole rash of these ideas of niche SVOD ideas sprang up. And History is one of them. Others are very successful as well. And it just struck us, this is a time, the white label platforms, the solutions became available in terms of, it wasn't super expensive to build this platform, and we thought we could license a bit of content. We thought we could make, and there was another revolution going on, of course, which is the simplicity of production. So now I can make shows. We've got a backpack which we can go hand luggage only on a plane with a camera that shoots 4K, all the sound gear,
wow.
A gimbal, obviously, so it's nice and stable, little tripod, monopod, and a drone. And that's in a backpack. So we're going hand luggage only on aircraft. Now, my first job was in Egypt in 2002, and the excess baggage was £7,500 UK pounds. And that was just the excess baggage on the flight. So we've taken advantage of all these little breakthroughs, and it's come together nicely. And I'm really happy that people are prepared to watch that kind of content.
But then, of course, you've got to work out how you monetize it, and you've gone down the subscription service route rather than, for example, advertising. What are the challenges along the way to try and get a viable subscription service?
Well, AVOD and SVOD both present huge challenges, and I think that the challenges on SVOD is it's really hard to get people to part with $5, euros, pounds, quite rightly. We have got a lot better at digital marketing. Digital marketing has been a huge factor. A lot better at content creation, organic marketing. So we've worked out we can create moments that will break into the news cycle. We can find those tanks that are buried in Russian rivers. We can interview those people who are going to be reunited with their long-lost sibling who they were separated from in the turmoil that followed the Second World War. And that we can then do old-fashioned PR on that as well. So that does drive subscribers. So we've had to use every trick in the box people can imagine. It's digital marketing, it's old-fashioned PR. And it's just trying to establish, and then using the pod relentlessly as well, using the audio to try and drive through the paywall. So the pod is the filter at the top of the funnel. We got .com as well, huge .com page. So the .com and the pod are free. Trying to drive people down, make them subscribe, give them benefits, get them involved in this journey with us.
Tell me, we were talking, there was a session earlier where we had a panellist who had an SVOD that was a royal SVOD, so really niche, British royal family. And I just wondered, because obviously, in a way, you say that history is niche, but it's not that niche. Right. There's a lot of history. And I wonder, how much do you know about your subscribers, their demographics, where they're from, what areas of history they're interested in? And I wonder if that drives your content?
Well, that's a really good point. And if it was True Royalty you had on earlier, I'm very familiar with them. And I agree in a weird way. We had this discussion when we launched. Actually, history is quite broad, because in fact, it's everything that's ever happened to anyone who's ever lived. So, of course, most documentaries you'd see on Hulu or Netflix count as history, like Michael Jordan, that's history, it's decades ago. So we definitely, one of our early is, should we just launch World War II history? Should we launch medieval? Should we just do Roman? And actually we didn't. And I'm kind of glad, but actually that was less a commercial decision, more because I'm a generalist and I just wanted to work on all these different things. But we know quite a lot about our audiences. We know very little about the podcast listeners because Apple just owns them all and tells us very little about them. We know quite a lot more about our audiences. We're trying to learn more all the time. We set up WhatsApp groups for our audiences, so we're getting to know them. We've had live events. Live events was a big part of our business last year. Predictably, this year has not really worked out. So we meet them in person, and we kind of interview them and find out about them. And they tend to be younger than a BBC Two audience, which is about 60. They tend to be in their mid-30s, some median age. And they are interested... Interestingly, they have their own personal preferences, but we feel when they build up, they tell us they're prepared to come with us on journeys once they trust the brand, once they trust the channel. But obviously, World War II looms very large, and so does a good chunky medieval soap. Knights, castles, that looms, particularly outside the UK.
Interesting. Now, I know that your subscriber base is growing quite rapidly, and you are poised for future growth. Because of this summer's acquisition by digital content firm Little Dot Studios. Little Dot, many people will be familiar with because it's owned by production giant All3Media, makers of Fleabag, Gogglebox and Call the Midwife. So, it's a very, very, very well-known big brand. So I wonder what Little Dot's plans are for History Hit TV. I mean, how does that marriage work? Because I can imagine that, you love your content and you're very engaged. You don't want to give any of that control away, do you?
Yeah, I wouldn't have sold the business to anyone else in the world, I think, apart from Little Dot. They are a phenomenon, people know. I mean, All3Media phenomenon. They're, I think, the biggest single provider of content to Netflix, for example, in the world. So a huge British success story. And Little Dot are responsible for a giant proportion of global YouTube traffic. They are astonishing YouTube. Now, I had no game on YouTube at all. They came along with the world's biggest history channel on YouTube and several other history assets. And it just was clear to me immediately this was a perfect marriage. So I, as well as getting on very well with the individuals there, it just was a perfect coming together. So we have now between us got this huge podcast, history podcast, gigantic AVOD via their YouTube timeline, YouTube asset, and now we're able to then drive people using both of those to become subscribers, and it's already working really well. So it's super exciting that we are able to, and we've already started to do joint commissions, originals, History Hit, and Timeline. So YouTube and subscriber, and the great thing is, the Timeline audience is still quite a big, global, massive general audience. We are able to do things like, for example, we shoot a show for Timeline, it goes on there. All of the interviews with historians, all the long stuff, that all can sit on ours for the real specialists, who want to see that stuff in detail. They all come. It's great content for us. So there's loads of great ways to work together. Fantastic.
Look, one of the great things about the format that we're using today is that we can have viewers who are watching us can then ask me questions onto the iPad, and I can put them straight onto you. So one that's just come in asks, which tech partners, Dan, did you work with when you were setting up History Hits TV, and how important were they in your success?
Well, without SimpleStream, we would never be able to do it. So SimpleStream set it up for us. I mentioned earlier the solutions that became available. SimpleStream were able to build and launch a SVOD channel, and they've handled that all for us, the back end, payment, etc. So it has been, it's been a really, really good relationship. Again, without them, we wouldn't have, because we would not have been able to build that engine ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely, I understand. Now, you've proved that there is, a real audience for a history SVOD, and we've seen that there are lots of other, even smaller niche areas. I wonder what you think the impact is on broadcast TV, which is trying to cater for broader audiences. I mean, is it eating away? Because people obviously only have a certain amount of time to watch things on their screens.
Yeah, I think inevitably it's going to eat away. I mean, I sort of can speak from my own personal experience. When I discovered podcasts, I stopped listening to radio, and actually that's a shame because I now have I listen to American politics and I listen to history, and I've stopped kind of just picking up a Radio 4 doc in the afternoon on geology or something, which I think is a shame. But I can only imagine that you're going to just mobilise groups of fans. You're going to turn them into people that are interested in kind of that sort of specialist output rather than a more general. If you have a chance of watching I think we follow, in many ways, sport. Sport led the way in terms of providing content that you and I don't even understand the words they're using when I watch golf or baseball, kind of niche SVOD or niche. I mean, I don't even know what they're talking about because they know the audience there with them on that journey. They're not having to kind of do the 101 that and I know because I've made TV shows, obviously, about history for 20 years. There's something very, very satisfying about immediately assuming an audience of specialists.
Yes, absolutely. Because when you're doing generic, broad programmes, you were talking about listening to Radio 4 in the afternoon. You do have to explain all of the things that you're talking about. And as I have a son who is absolutely an F1 buff, and he can watch something incredibly niche. And you're right, I haven't a clue what he's talking about, but he's certainly enjoying it. Another audience question, Dan, is it's great to see so much passion. What is next for Dan Snow? VR, AR, personalised ancestry experiences, they're asking.
Well, I'm just going to write those down. That sounds brilliant. But I mean, VR and AR, obviously huge, exciting, couple of meetings. Just trying to work out the best sort of way to do those because they're tricky, but obviously around historical spaces, information embedded in those spaces for sure. So I haven't thought about the genealogy one, but that's great. So I nicked that one.
Excellent. And another question about is there anything that, looking back, you would have done differently with History Hit? So what have you learned from over the years? What mistakes would you not make if you were doing it all again?
Well, I made virtually every mistake was possible to make. I made them. I love that Churchill quote about sort of success is staggering from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm, and that is so true of this journey. It's been miserable. The early days when you're kind of going up to people on the street and begging them to subscribe, counting your cousins and your mum as subscribers. But no, I think I would have. Look, I'm afraid to say I would have just got on all those new social media platforms earlier. I was an established TV presenter. 2006 YouTube was launched. I was already on TV, and I thought, who are these losers on YouTube? I mean, what's going on with that? And I think the lesson is, it's obviously hard to pick them because some of them came and went. But
do you think you have to pick them all? I mean, is there? I mean, you must have been on platforms that didn't work.
Yeah, a couple of times. I mean, for example, I'm relatively larger on Twitter than other platforms, and Twitter doesn't translate that well. We don't convert that well from Twitter. It's for people being clever and being witty and learning the news, and so I think just getting lucky with those platforms, and perhaps if I'd done YouTube, Instagram a bit earlier on, then it would have been a bit easier. That's all.
But it has worked very well as it is. I wonder what your view then is on the future. This is a big question, but the future of television over sort of the next decade. Do you think there are going to end up with being fewer broadcast channels and more of these on-demand specialist channels? Is that the way you see it going?
I think it feels very hard to argue with that. If you look what's happened to audio already, and I think if we look back at publishing, magazines were doing that for decades. People like niche content. They like to feel part of something, part of a community. They like to believe that their knowledge is already being assumed and respected. And I think it's very hard to say that the future won't belong. Well, we've seen the revenue model doesn't quite stack up yet for a place like Disney and Netflix. But I think it's hard to assume that you're going to go niche, because obviously the idea of a general broadcaster has only been a product of the technology of the last 100 years. Yes. Newspapers have always been niche. The things people read in the coffee shops around London in the 18th century, the pamphlets, they're always niche. The idea that you need to provide something for everybody is a product of how many transmitters you have, how many channels you're able to broadcast on. So I'm not sure that's a given, and I think we may well go back to ultra niche broadcasting.
Well, Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and a really wonderful product, something that I'm very engaged in. So thank you so much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you.
Now, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, a panel of experts is going to consider how the TV experience is improving with better pictures, better sound, and of course, an easier way to find and watch the programmes that we want. That's all in a couple of minutes. See you then.